Today we're going to talk about a really interesting feature of Icelandic grammar called the middle voice. As the name kind of implies, this is a voice or mode of speaking which comes somewhere between the active voice and the passive voice. In English we have the active voice and the passive voice. First, in the active voice would be a sentence such as Iris opnaði gluggann. In English, Iris opened the window. Here we have a subject, Iris, and a verb, and Iris is the one doing the action, and the object of the verb, the thing affected by the verb, is gluggan. And this is our kind of standard voice that we use most of the time, especially in school. We're taught that the active voice is clearer, easier to understand, and we're encouraged to write using the active voice instead of the passive voice. It's not always actually the case that the active voice is clearer. It depends on exactly what we're trying to say. But this is a very straightforward example of Iris opnaði gluggann. The active voice often has a focus on the person doing the action. So Iris, the subject, she comes at the start of the sentence. In Icelandic, we have subject, verb, object word order, just like in English. And that means that the focus is really on Iris. What is she doing? The passive voice would be Glugginn var opnaður af Írisi. And the af Írisi is optional there because in the passive voice, we often don't have as much focus on who did the action, or perhaps it's not relevant. The passive voice allows us to drop that information. So, Glugginn var opnaður, the window was opened by Íris. Now, glugginn, the object of the verb, is the first element in the sentence. So the object's actually been moved up, and grammatically it's been made into the subject of the sentence. And there's some other things going on there with the verb. So the verb opna has gone into the past participle form, and we have the copular verb vera, which has been inserted there. That makes it a passive structure. It's actually very similar structure in English. The window was opened. We use past participle there as well in English. And we can specify who did the action with av, the preposition av, which is equivalent to by in English. But if that's not particularly important, then we can drop that, as we mentioned before. So the middle voice then comes sort of bang in between these two modes of expression, because active voice puts the emphasis on the agent, the doer of the action. Passive voice puts the emphasis on the object or the patient of the action. So what is middle voice doing then? Well, let's look at an example here. Glugginn opnaðist. And what you'll notice is there's actually no agent in this sentence. There's no one doing the action. And what's unique about the middle voice is that there's no actual possibility of specifying who did the action. We can't, like with the passive, say Glugginn opnaðist af Írisi. That would be ungrammatical. So what does this actually mean then? Well, it means something like the window opened all by itself. We either don't know who did it, or actually maybe it wasn't done by a person. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe the window was old and creaky and it just came open by itself. So it implies that no person was involved in the action. It's just something which spontaneously happened. So Icelandic has this possibility to express this nuance, which we're missing really in English, and I use English as a reference point, but other languages do have something similar to the middle voice. In French and Spanish, you have a sort of reflexive type structure with the reflexive pronouns se or si. This is kind of a slightly different nuance to that, and the middle voice has a lot more functions. So we're going to look at some of those now. But this is the basic one, something happening spontaneously by itself. Another very common use of the middle voice is to indicate reciprocity. Reciprocity essentially means people doing things to each other. This is one of the first ways in which people encounter the middle voice when they learn Icelandic, because one of the first phrases you use or learn in Icelandic is við sjáumst, see you. But við sjáumst doesn't actually mean see you. It translates to we will see each other. And it's that ST ending there which indicates the middle voice. We're going to come on to the formation of the middle voice a bit later, but you'll see that in all these examples here, the middle voice form always ends in ST. Let's run through some of these examples here then. So, eigum við að hittast á morgun. Eigum við að hittast á morgun. Shall we meet tomorrow? Literally meet each other. In English, we don't actually require the each other part in that sentence. We could drop that and we could just say meet. But we can't do that in Icelandic. We couldn't put hitta in this sentence with no object in there, because hitta is what's called a transitive verb, so it requires an object. Hittast is intransitive. It doesn't require an object. In fact, it can't even take an object if it wanted to. But it's not necessary because it's implied in the middle voice form that we are doing this to each other. So we are going to meet each other. Eigum við að hittast á morgun. Next example, sjáumst eftir helgi. Sjáumst eftir helgi. We will see each other after the weekend. See you on Monday, we would probably say. Okay, Sigrún og Jón kysstust í sófanum. Sigrún og Jón kysstust í sófanum. Sigrún and Jón kissed each other on the sofa. Börnin og foreldrarnir haldast í hendur á leið í skólan. Börnin og foreldrarnir haldast í hendur á leið í skólan. The children and the parents hold each other's hands, so literally hold each other in the hands on the way to school. They hold hands. Þau talast ekki við lengur. Þau talast ekki við lengur. And here we have a different structure because we have a preposition involved there. So tala við means to talk to somebody. We can put that into a middle voice form, and this sentence would translate as they don't speak to each other anymore. So that's our first usage, reciprocity. Another common usage of middle voice is reflexivity, which essentially means doing something to oneself. So let's have a look at some examples here. So, hann datt fram yfir sig og meiddist. He tripped over, so he literally fell over himself. Datt fram yfir sig og meiddist. Meiða means to hurt or injure. So he tripped over himself and got hurt. Now, we could say meiddi sig as well. Sometimes you have the option to use a traditional reflexive structure, meiddi sig. However, there's sometimes a bit of a nuanced distinction. So with meiða sig, it could be hurting yourself by accident, or it could actually be also on purpose. But with meiðast, it's very clear that that was something that was unintentional, it was accidental. Next example, skólabörnin settust á bekkin. The school children sat down on the bench. So this comes from setjast, to sit down. Icelandic makes a distinction between sitja, to be sitting, and setjast, the motion of sitting down. It literally translates as set themselves. So the school kids sat down on the bench. Ásdís klæðist rauðum kjól. Klæðast means to wear. So Ásdís is wearing a red dress. But it's something like she has clothed herself in a red dress. So when we say reflexive, it means that the object of the verb is the same as the subject. So the person doing the action is the same as the person receiving the action. And middle voice often gives us a very simple way to express that idea. We do have reflexive structures in Icelandic alongside this as well, though, and so there is sometimes a bit of overlap between these two. Another usage of the middle voice is to indicate a sort of passivity or spontaneous action. So it can come very close to being a passive voice sometimes. There are times where it can only really be interpreted with a passive meaning, but it's just actually more idiomatic in Icelandic to use a middle voice rather than use a traditional passive structure like we saw earlier on. Let's look at the first example there. Mikill hávaði heyrist í götunni. Mikill hávaði heyrist í götunni. A lot of noise can be heard in the street. We don't know who can hear the noise. That's not particularly relevant in this example. The focus is on the noise, mikill hávaði. This is an instance in Icelandic where we actually can't use a passive voice. We can't say heyrður. It's just not idiomatic to do that in Icelandic. Next example, this is a really sort of classic middle voice example. Nýja bókin seldist ekki vel. Nýja bókin seldist ekki vel. The new book did not sell well. And you might sort of be able to interpret this as well as slightly reflexive, as if the book wasn't selling itself well. If it was a person actively selling the book, hann seldi bókina, then it would be just an active voice. But here it's about the book's sort of ability to be an appealing product for people to buy. So there isn't any particular person doing the selling there, and so we can use a middle voice. Next example we have here is Vettlingarnir mínir týndust en fundust strax aftur. Vettlingarnir mínir týndust en fundust strax aftur. So my mittens got lost, but they were found right away. They turned up right away. So we can kind of see here that the middle voice can sometimes be used to absolve oneself of something or deflect. We can say my gloves got lost, not I lost my gloves. We don't need to say ég týndi vettlingunum mínum, but vettlingarnir mínir týndust. They just got lost all by themselves, and they just turned up all by themselves. Next example is kind of similar to the first one. So það sést ekki neitt í myrkrinu. Það sést ekki neitt í myrkrinu. We can't really translate it word for word because we just don't have this grammatical structure in English. The gloss would be something like you can't see anything in the dark. Last example, ég fæddist árið 1990. Ég fæddist árið 1990. I was born in the year 1990. So fæða would be a verb to give birth, and that requires an object. Fæðast, to be born, doesn't require an object, and that's just translated as a passive into English. But we can see with all of the examples in this second half here, there isn't really one consistent structure that we would use when translating into English, because we just don't have anything that is anything like this. So we would need to take a sort of case-by-case approach if we were to go about translating these. But anyway, you might not be interested in translation, but it's just a little interesting idea. Some verbs change meaning in the middle voice. They either get a sort of nuanced distinction, or maybe they have a meaning which seems actually quite far removed from the original meaning. Let's take a first example. Gera, to do. Gerast, to happen. And we can kind of maybe see the link there, because gerast, to happen, you could think, in the passive voice that might be to be done. Something is being done. It might not be being done by someone. It might be sort of spontaneously doing itself. And that's kind of what happen means, isn't it, really? So next example, taka, to take, literally to take something with our hand or whatever else. Takast. Takast means to succeed. In English we have this sense in the verb take. If something takes or doesn't take, it can mean that it succeeds or doesn't succeed. In Icelandic, to show that nuance, we use the middle voice. Sýna. Sýna, it means to show in a literal sense. Sýnast, to seem, to appear to be a certain way, to show itself to be a certain way. Finna. Finna means to find or to feel, but probably in this case find. And then finnast. Well, finnast actually has two senses in the middle voice. It's the first sense that we saw in the mittens example. Vettlingarnir mínir fundust. They were found. But it's also more commonly used in the expression mér finnst, I think. It finds to me. In English we would say I find. That sense is the kind of an abstract sense of the verb, not a literal sense of the verb. There are some other verbs which only exist in the middle voice. They don't have a corresponding form that is not with the middle voice. These would be verbs like ferðast, to travel, nálgast, to approach or get nearer, öðlast, to acquire, vesenast. Vesenast is a great word which comes from vesen. Vesen means something like hassle. Vesenast is to kind of muck around with something or fiddle around with something. Many of these are formed from nouns or adjectives. So ferðast comes from ferð. Vesenast clearly comes from vesen. And we can spontaneously form new verbs like this. So we could say, for example, take the noun pabbi, dad, and we could translate that into the verb pabbast, which means something like to do dad duty, to be doing things that a dad does. It's very active and productive, and people make up their own formations with these still today, so this is really fun. All right, so let's move on now to how we actually form the middle voice. Middle voice is very straightforward because it kind of is a simplified verb paradigm compared to the active voice. And there's quite a simple way that we form it. And it's worth just making clear here that the middle voice is not a tense. We only have two tenses in Icelandic. We have present tense and we have past tense. The middle voice can exist in the present tense and the past tense. That's why it's called a voice and not a tense. It's a different mode of expression, but it doesn't say anything about time. So that's just important to make clear. To form the middle voice, whatever consonant we have on the end of the verb form, the active verb form, unless that's M, we remove that and then we add the ending st. So we have the example here, ég breyti, I change. Ég breytist, middle voice. Þú breytir, þú breytist. In the second one, we've just removed the R, and that's given us þú breytist. And you can see that actually ends up being the same as the first person form. We skip down to við breytum, first person plural form, and then we would just add við breytumst. Let's look at examples from past tense. So ég breyti, ég breytist. Þú breytir, þú breytist. So again, we have the sort of overlapping forms. We can also have middle voice in the past participle form. So ég hef breytt, ég hef breyst. So we've removed the T's and we've put the ST in there instead. Let's look at some examples from each verb group then. And we're just going to look at the present tense. Let's look at group 1 weak verbs. This is also known as the R group. So in the active form, it would be as follows. Ég vona, þú vonar, hann vonar, við vonum, þið vonið, þeir vona. Middle voice. Ég vonast, þú vonast, hún vonast, við vonumst, þið vonist, þær vonast. Vona means to hope. Ég vona að það rignir ekki. I hope that it doesn't rain. And ég vonast is when you hope for something for yourself. So ég vonast til að fá að hitta hann. I hope I get the chance to meet him. Let's look at group 2 then. So this is also known as the ear group. Let's look at active first. So ég hræði, þú hræðir, hann hræðir, við hræðum, þið hræðið, þeir hræða. Middle voice, ég hræðist, þú hræðist, hún hræðist, við hræðumst, þið hræðist, þær hræðast. Hræða means to scare, to frighten. Hræðast means to be scared of something. Then finally we have group 3, weak verbs and also strong verbs, because in the present tense they follow a very similar pattern. The first person is just the bare stem of the verb with no inflectional ending, and the second and third person singular forms have this ur ending. And what's a bit different here is that the ur, the vowel itself, is also removed when we make the middle voice. So let's look at active first. So ég gef, þú gefur, hann gefur, við gefum, þið gefið, þeir gefa. Middle voice, ég gefst, þú gefst, hún gefst, við gefumst, þið gefist, þær gefast. So gefa means to give. Gefast in the middle voice is used in several different senses, but one quite common one would be gefast upp, to give up. So ég gefst ekki upp, I will not give up. Why has the U vowel disappeared here? There's a kind of a historical reason for that. In Old Norse, the second and third person form here would be givr, with no U. This U came in later. By that time, the middle voice endings had already stabilized and that U was not going to then be inserted. The U was added to make it sort of easier to pronounce the R on the end of the word. Gevrst doesn't really work. So we go from gefur to gefst. Okay, so this was an overview of the middle voice. If you want to get a written up summary of everything, you can head over to Icelandic Grammar Reference at icelandicgrammar.com. The link's below in the description, and you can get a detailed explanation of all things middle voice. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more videos like this one.